Hi, and welcome to the Filmmakers Compass podcast, a show where we talk about movies and more movies. I'm D-Man, joined by CP, and for anybody that is only listening today, CP, you are dressed accordingly. You look like you're ready for a, Egyptian adventure.
Well, if you mean, in fact, I'm dressed like Indiana Jones, then you are correct.
That's exactly what I meant. I guess I don't see a whip, but you do have the fedora and your colors are on point. So well done.
I try. We're trying to bring some effort to this podcast. So,
Well, pretty exciting because apparently Indiana Jones dropped this week and you had the chance to see it. I have not. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the show. And that's pretty exciting because it's been, about a decade, I think, since Indiana Jones, last had a new adventure. And we'll hear how that went. But before we jump into any of those discussions, CP, I just wanted to say to everybody, I hope you had a fantastic 4th of July. Hope everybody got to enjoy, some good food, some fireworks, and some of those great movies we discussed last week. So
very true.
Yeah, Ivor actually said thanks, guys, to our 4th of July post. And CP, I was just going to ask you, did you do anything fun?
I watched The Patriot and I grilled. So watch some fireworks. That's pretty much what you do on 4th of July.
Yep, barbecue, fireworks, and I'm not going to lie, I did a late night. I put on Jaws. That was the one. I love Jaws. That's just such a good movie. So yeah, 4th of July was a blast, literally and figuratively, and I can't wait till next year. So on Twitter, Eric Drucker actually chimed in and said at Film Comp Podcast, and then he tagged you and me individually. He said, what are you guys watching today? Happy 4th. And that was in reference to Independence Day, which, Drucker, you're ahead of the game here. You know where we're going with this show, and I love you for it. So thank you so much. He said, or he posted a GIF of Independence Day. So we did end up getting into a little bit of a conversation there about some of the 4th of July movies. And Drucker, I hope you enjoyed that conversation on last week's episode. Now, CP, he did bring up something very, very important that we forgot to mention, and that is Team America. We
not
did
as
not
patriotic a movie as there is.
Yeah, I can't believe we left that one off. That's actually pretty crazy when we think about it. I mean, I think I put on there. What's the
Captain America?
No, I'm blanking on the female baseball movie.
Oh, A League of Their Own.
A League of Their Own, yeah. I'm like, that made the list, but Team America didn't. I think Drucker made a very good point there. And he also did have a comment related to your having viewed Indiana Jones, which I'm not going to get into that yet. Maybe we'll bring it up when we talk about it. But Drucker, I don't know if you've seen that movie, but if you have, we'd love to hear your opinion because I obviously still have to see it and I probably will be going. So before we move into our topics this week, CP, I did want to just say that we have joined Threads.
Ooh.
So we are now on another social media channel, and you can find us there at Film Comp Podcast, just like Instagram.
So D-Man, question: have we actually posted anything on Threads, or are we just there?
We're there. So we haven't really journeyed out yet into the Threads verse. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on Threads so far? I mean, it's very limited. It's only been out about a week.
It's so well. I think probably the most beneficial component of Twitter I always found was like, kind of like what's trending.
Yeah.
And
the trending tab.
Without that, Threads feels very insulated. Like it feels like it's only about the people within my network. It doesn't give me the sense of like, this is what's going on in the whole world, which was kind of what always made Twitter a useful social media platform.
Yeah, I think Twitter was known for being the place to go to for breaking news because it would obviously shoot to the top of the trending charts. You could literally campaign for certain things and get hashtags or phrases or words to trend. But obviously, a lot of people's journey on Twitter would start on the trending page because that's kind of like what's happening right now. What are the conversations? So yeah, without that, and then I don't know if you noticed, but so far in my experience, and this is only looking at other people's posts, it looked to me that hashtags themselves were not working or they were not clickable.
Yeah.
It might index, but you can't click through.
Yeah, which also was weird because again, what's great is if there's a conversation going on in the Twitterverse, you can join it by following the hashtags.
Yeah, so it felt a little bare bones there. I don't know. That was kind of strange.
Yeah,
And I
I
noticed
agree.
too, this was just me. They had a thing in the settings. This is on my personal account now, but where you could set it to show in your main feed the people that you follow. Because apparently, if you don't change that setting, it just kind of pre-populates with, whatever some of the most popular threads are. And I wasn't really feeling it because there was a lot
Yeah.
of things that I didn't really care about. And I was kind of like, that's what Twitter does, is indexes all that. And then you click through to what you're interested about.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, I don't know. I don't know how I felt about that. But then again, this app is only a week old. I mean, Meta has been around in social for a long time. So I know they know how to do things like hashtags and what have you.
Yeah.
So I suspect we'll start to see some of those things pop up sooner rather than later.
Well, so yeah, so audience, if you're on Threads, let us know what your experience is, and have you found anything that you really like about it? Because so far, I think for D-Man and I, we're still kind of feeling it out, and nothing has blown us away. So, if you found something that you really like or particular application for it that you think is great, let us know.
Awesome. Well, CP, I'll throw it over to you. Do you have any shout outs on this episode?
I have zero shout outs.
Okay. All right. Well, then that means we are going to get into our first topic this week, which is actually a movie. So we both hit the theater this week and we went to go see Angel Studios' The Sound of Freedom, starring Jim Caviezel,
Very
and
true.
dealing with some pretty tough subject matter in the, basically the child sex trade. So
Yeah.
now,
Yeah. Not a happy fun movie if you want to go see a happy fun movie.
yeah. So it's actually a movie that is interesting for a lot of reasons. But first of all, I just wanted to get your opinion. What did you think of the film?
I mean, it's a heavy movie. It's dealing with a very heavy subject. I mean, it was made for a much lower budget than most things that we see out in theaters these days. So that was kind of different. I don't know. Those are my immediate takeaways. But
You
it's a
know,
heavy movie. It's not fun.
I was gonna say, I think, well, they have a couple fun characters they do embed throughout the
Yeah.
story, which is good. That's really good because
But
you
it's
do
not
need
a
a
movie
little.
that you want to, if you want to feel good about the world, you don't go see The Sound of Freedom. If you want to feel really bad about the world, go see The Sound of Freedom.
I mean, yeah, it has a bleak view of the current state of things, but I will say, having seen it, it reminded me in structure a lot of Taken.
Mm,
So, which, if you remember, Liam Neeson, Taken, probably, what are we looking at? Maybe like 15 years ago now. They've
yep.
had a couple
About
sequels
that.
since then.
Yep.
But I mean, the story structure is that his daughter, while vacationing in Europe, is abducted into the sex trade. And here she's an adult and these are kids, but roughly very
Kind of the same
similar.
type of thing, going after him, hunting down bad guys.
Now, I will say, Taken, Liam Neeson's character is, I mean, objectively, he's a fictional character versus what in this case is, I think his name is, what is it? Timoteo?
Yeah.
He
He's
is
a
based on a
real,
real person.
yeah, real federal agent.
Right. So they probably only have so much liberty on how badass they can make him without
Yeah.
going like full Rambo. But
Yeah.
Taken is a fictional character, and I will say Liam Neeson's character is absolutely badass. And I feel like that movie obviously has much more sensationalized action sequences and fight scenes versus here. It feels like it's a little bit more down to earth, or what closer to probably what actually happened, where you
Yeah.
don't have like necessarily like these massive fight scenes and chases through European cities and all that. So, but on the flip side, I felt like the movie does do a good job of introducing a kind of a squad of characters that are going to go on this mission, and they definitely, based off the opening scene, have you invested in them successfully going and finding these kids who were abducted.
Mhm.
So, and I feel like they do a fairly good job of keeping the pace of the movie moving and never dwelling quite too long on anything too grotesque. Even a lot of the stuff is a little bit more alluded to than always, shown. Thank
Overt.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
good reason. So, but one of the things, The Sound of Freedom, if you see the film, you'll know why it's called that. I won't spoil it for you, and I won't spoil the end. But it's a movie that it's weird because when I left, I found myself talking more about the subject matter than the film itself,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So obviously at the end of the film, the movie puts up some stats on, the current what the slave trade looks like in like 2020 I guess it could go, it should be updated to today, 2023, but I think this movie is like 5 years old. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure at what point these statistics were from, but probably within the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then it does have, if you stay for a post credits kind of a little message from Jim Caviezel, he kind of makes a pitch at the end of the movie about why the subject matter of this film is important. And he makes a very good point that even, here on this podcast, talking about the child sex trade is something that it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't really want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's ugly. It's the ugly side of humanity. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to bring that up at the dinner table or even on our podcast. So, his pitch at the end of the movie was, hey, let's take more of an activist stance here and say that the story itself will be the stand-in for that conversation, and just share the story. Share it on your social media, tell people to see the movie, but you don't have to talk about the subject matter. And to that end, if people see the movie, hopefully we can raise enough awareness to hopefully enact some sort of change in the future. So I thought it was interesting because I really did get that vibe leaving the movie, where afterwards I was like, wow, I can't believe all this crap happens. Like, you're like, literally, we were driving home and above there's a train with freight, and you're like, who knows who's in there?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know. Like, that's what's
Yeah.
crazy about this movie, is it opens your eyes to like, wow, this stuff is happening, and it's happening around you.
Yeah.
And so I found that, how do I say it? I think when I look at this movie, if you were to take the subject matter, meaning child abduction, slavery, all of that, and you were to just swap it out with something like, say, drugs, and instead of,
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
to rescue a kid, they're going to take down a drug dealer. Would this movie be as powerful? And I think no. I think the movie hinges on that. So go ahead.
Agree. Well, I think we've seen lots of movies about federal agents busting drug dealers and drug cartels, right?
Yeah, Bad
Traffics,
Boys.
Bad Boys, right? We watch
Narcos.
these movies. Miami Vice. They're financially successful in the box office, but because they're successful in the box office and we've seen them so many times, the message is not as powerful. This movie is, and probably part of the reason why it took 5 years to get distribution, is there are probably a lot of studio execs that are like, I don't want to touch that. Like, who's honestly in good conscience going to want to go see a movie about kids being sold into slavery? Mm-hmm. No thanks. That's not a fun, that's not a fun summer blockbuster. But because of that, and because they went there and did and managed to end the film in a positive note, which I think is the other reason why everybody could sit through this film. This was a successful story in the end. But because of that, we just haven't seen it as much. So seeing it makes the message more powerful, which is probably why the social action campaign is built on, hey, go get other people to see this movie. And then we're all on the same page and we understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a movie that literally it's approaching that level. So like, it wasn't on my radar when I went to go see it. I mean, I'd heard the title, The Sound of Freedom, but I didn't know what it was about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my wife, Steph, wanted to go see it, and I'm like, okay, cool, like I'm down. There's tons of movies I want to go see that I'm like, she's probably never heard of. Let's do it. So yeah, I'm like, all right, let's go. So we go, and it's funny because it does feel like a movie that's approaching that level of like social consciousness. I'm starting to see it pop up in places like Fox News and some social media feeds, where it's kind of like, if you don't go see it, people are kind of like, you're kind of an asshole, like you should, just because, like, right, like it's almost like that either or, meaning like if you go see it, you're a hero, but if you don't, apparently you like support slavery, like, so it's like approaching that sort of zeitgeist in our cultural discourse right now, where it's kind of like we're not shaming people to go see it, but it's kind of like you probably should.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I was going to ask you, like, do you think that's kind of a good activist plan? Because I feel like obviously when you just read people's reviews and you go to Rotten Tomatoes, anywhere, I mean, the commentary about the movie is overwhelmingly positive, meaning I don't get the sense that anybody's shaming anybody. They're just like, it's so good, you should go see it. It's on social media where you start to get these influencers that, start pushing that narrative. You think that's the right way to go? I don't know.
I mean, it's tough to say. I think part of it is, I mean, we've seen, this is not the first film that we've seen kind of embedded with a social action campaign, right? In 2004, Participant Media was launched, and every film of theirs has a social activism component to it. The difference is a lot of those are sign a petition, send this to your congressman, things like that. This is a very easy message because all the filmmakers are asking of us to do is we don't have to go online, we don't have to click any URLs, we don't have to donate money. They just want the audience to make sure that other people go see it so that we can all share the story and all be understanding of what's going on in this world that we have very little knowledge of because we intentionally don't want to look in that corner, right?
Yeah.
So I think it is really successful.
And I mean, on that note, we can go ahead and kind of spread the message that was also included in the message at the end of the film, which is that if you do go to The Sound of Freedom, you just go to Google, type in the film, find the official website. They do have shareable ticket options, as well as, I believe, depending on which markets you're in, there are free tickets available.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting because they just want people to see it. They want the conversation around this. Not even the conversation, I think just awareness.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if we can raise awareness, and I think if the box office profile can get high enough, meaning the movie does make enough money, it's also proof that people care about this issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can point to that and say, like, hey, this is a big deal, and it needs backing from, big money and political places.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. It just reminds me a little bit of it's funny. It's another Jim Caviezel movie, but does it remind you a little bit of Passion of the Christ?
Kind of in the same way how there wasn't a lot of marketing behind the film on like billboards and commercials and trailers, but it was totally word of mouth, people saying, oh, you should see this movie.
Yeah. And I kind of got the sense that if you were Christian or Catholic or something, and maybe, any other religions, just because it would be an opportunity to, kind of see this story. I don't know. It was weird because I do remember at that time kind of feeling like, I don't want to get into religion here, but literally it felt like there was a little bit of pressure maybe from certain religions. Like if you were part of that religion, it was like, you should probably see it. Like you should support this movie, and, it's kind of like a must see for Christians. So like, if you haven't, you're missing out. Like I said, I don't think they were getting to levels of shaming people, but it just felt like there was a little bit of extra pressure on you to be like, you should, in good
you
conscience,
should care about this.
Yeah, you should go see it. And so it's weird because I feel like this movie, that's the major takeaway that I had was it's so built around the awareness and whatever the causes associated with the film, that it was interesting because it was weird. Do I think this movie would necessarily be voted for best picture? I don't. Like I said, I think the subject matter definitely evokes emotion, which is good. And I thought all the performances were good. Jim Caviezel does a great job. He's pretty stoic. Is it Tim Ballard? I think that was his name.
I think that was his name. Yeah.
Yeah. Timoteo in the movie. And the kids' performances were stellar. I mean, the people who were villains, you definitely hated them. So I feel like, it was well-rounded. There was a couple moments of comedy in there that I thought they hit. So generally speaking, I thought it worked. I don't know if it's definitely, to me, it didn't feel like a best picture nominee or anything, but, glad to see it crushing it at the box office, which on that note, CP, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been for one day, it may have been for one weekend, but it did beat Indiana Jones.
I believe it did for the weekend, which blows my mind.
That is remarkable because you're going up against, an established IP and all of the marketing and prowess of Disney and Harrison Ford and everybody associated with that. So yeah, that's pretty insane. It also speaks a lot to this movie doing well around Independence Day. I don't know if it's people feeling patriotic or whatever, but it worked. It should have been people just being like, man, I want to go see Indy kick Nazis' asses. But apparently, CP, that's not what has happened. Now, I want to kick this over to you because you actually saw the film. So I don't want to comment too much here, but first of all, tell us your thoughts on the movie. I mean, I'm interested to hear what you actually thought of the film, and then maybe why you think its box office performance has been
Ooh.
less than stellar.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, of course. This is why we're here.
All right. Well, I'll try to keep the spoilers out of this, but I'm sure most of you, if you saw on Instagram, I posted a pretty scathing review, which normally I walk out of a movie and I'm like, yeah, it's pretty much what you expected. And this one, and I would like to be very clear, I made sure I went in with the lowest of the low of expectations. And just so you
It's
have an
like
idea of
that.
how bad it was, halfway through the movie, I found myself on my phone shopping Amazon in the movie theater, which, yeah, I was like, wow, this is a bad film. And I think part of it comes down to just a few things. It was abundantly clear that the filmmakers did not understand what an audience wants out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Interesting. You would think they'd be right on that.
That's what I would think. Um, so there's things in the film that just don't work. The main artifact and kind of the magical properties around it was outright stupid.
Okay.
They're so let's start with the beginning of the film. They're trying to tap into the Indiana Jones that we all know and love. They
Mm-hmm.
give us a de-aged Harrison Ford who is running on a train fighting Nazis. I'm like, okay,
Okay.
this works, right? Like, I mean, the Last Crusade starts with Indiana Jones running across a train. We spent two indie movies fighting Nazis. Like, let's give it again. This is probably a worthwhile attempt. The problem is the de-aging technology is really bad. And it looks like Harrison Ford is straight out of an Indiana Jones video game.
I just can't believe that. Like,
And
I think that's crazy, dude.
and so we have this youngish Indiana Jones, but his voice is still 80-year-old Harrison Ford, kind of that gruff and raspy and not powerful, kind of
So they
Indiana Jones voice that we're using to of the confident, cool, the guy who's always going to beat the Nazis.
Dude, they should have just run Indy's voice from like Raiders of the Lost Ark through one of those like AI synthesizers.
Like they did on Maverick with Val Kilmer's voice, right?
Yeah, just like have that come out the other side. I'm sure the AI could do a better job than Harrison Ford of his
Yes.
younger self.
And it just didn't work. So then when we dive into the movie, part of it is the fact that Harrison Ford is really, really old. But he doesn't
Okay.
do the Indiana Jones things that we want. He's not running around really punching people. He's not truly getting in the caves, solving the puzzles to collect the artifact, right? He does a lot
Okay.
of running, which is an 80-year-old with probably a heart condition, I just didn't buy outright. But on top of it, there's really weird chemistry with the rest of the cast. Most of these characters are not people who, as an audience, we have attachment to, but even as Indiana Jones, it doesn't really seem like he has true attachment to them.
Okay.
It just doesn't work. And I think the biggest problem that I saw from the film was this. I felt like the filmmakers were under the impression that Harrison Ford, how do I want to say this? Let me make sure that I'm phrasing this correctly. I feel like the filmmakers were under the impression that Indiana Jones is Harrison Ford, but really Harrison Ford plays Indiana Jones.
You got to clarify. I'm not 100%
So
sure on this.
I think that who Indiana Jones is the fedora and the whip.
Okay.
He is a character like James Bond, a character like Batman, who it doesn't really matter who, as an actor, is portraying them. We are invested in that character, right? We want to see Indiana Jones in his prime, the guy who's going to give it all, who's win at all costs, saves the day, doing the daring, brave thing that we all wish that we could do. Even better, set it in kind of this 1920s, 30s world.
Okay.
Where he can be an adventurer. Instead, Indiana Jones is not a character like Michael Corleone from The Godfather, where Al Pacino is the embodiment of of Michael Corleone. And I feel like if they made a new Godfather movie and pick some other Italian American actor to play Michael Corleone, we'd be like, man, it's good, but you're not Michael Corleone.
Okay. I think
And
I get it. I mean,
feel like they're
the
thinking that Indiana Jones for us has to be Harrison Ford. And I'm like, no. Indiana Jones is someone who's brave and courageous, who doesn't give up, who wears a fedora and uses a whip. He could be anyone. And my point to this would be we saw River Phoenix play young Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, and most people were very pleased with it.
yeah, I liked it. I
It
thought it was
didn't
great.
matter that it was a different actor putting on the mantle of Indiana Jones. Sure, we got Harrison Ford and he was great. And I'm willing to bet that when they recast him someday, there will be some younger actor who will be like, he's good, but he's not Harrison Ford from the 80s, the guy who is, who gave the quintessential Indiana Jones performance. But I feel like they rested so much on we need to get one more movie with Harrison Ford. And I think that the approach would have been let's just make the best indie movie we could.
Do you think it would have been better if they put Indy kind of in a more mentor role? Like he's in it, but he's not maybe like Indy. I mean, on the
They
flip side,
tried that in Crystal Skull.
whatever happened to that guy?
Worked as good.
Mutt? Do they say?
Oh, they say.
Oh, okay. I don't. Is it a spoiler?
It's
Oh,
kind
okay.
of a spoiler. It's not a major spoiler, but they say. But the point is, they tried it. And I think, again, the problem is, you don't want to see. It's kind of the same reason why we don't have a Robin movie. We don't want to see Robin save the day. We want to see Batman save the day.
Okay. So, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying, though. I mean, I think James Bond and Batman are probably the best examples of like we've had multiple variations. They've been recast in many different mediums, many different film franchises. And some are better than others, but the idea is that, it's the cowl and the cape and it's, tuxedos and martinis and, his Walter PPK, like, at the end of the day, like James Bond is James Bond and James Bond will continue on whoever's playing him.
Yes.
And Indy should be approaching that sort of iconography where it's, yes, Harrison Ford may still be the best Indy and we'll debate that forever, but some people will say it's no debate, but the idea is that Indy can carry on and he should carry on in the time that Indy is the adventurer, because I think, you had kind of mentioned how, like the 1920s, or even if you're, looking at like the era of the Nazis, right? If you go too far forward in time, you start approaching new technology, essentially you start approaching the Mummy. Like
well, I think a
like
good
a more
example
modern day take on Indy.
look at if you compare it to the Mummy franchise, right? We had a great Mummy movie set in the 1920s and 30s, right, with Brendan Fraser, where he's running around in this era of adventuresome. And we had a Mummy movie with Tom Cruise that takes place in modern day. And one of them sucked and one of them is amazing. And I think there's a lot to be said about these types of characters can only truly work in a time and place where we give them the tools and the freedom to be those characters, right? We don't see a lot of modern day Westerns. They're rare, but most of the time when we want to make a good Western, we got to set it in the, the West, the old West.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Catwoman, but you just don't see a lot of whips in modern day, a modern day take on a weapon. It's like they're too advanced for the whip,
Yeah. So,
but it works great. It works great back then. So, I mean, here's the other thing though. When it comes to Indiana Jones, it's interesting because this is not Spielberg and it's not George Lucas. So, who was this? James Mangold, I think, is the director. So, I mean, he did get high praise from Spielberg after Spielberg saw the film, in which I believe this is not an actual quote, but a paraphrase. But Spielberg said, "I thought I was, the only one who could make one of these movies," which is high praise.
But the problem with that is Spielberg is always so nice and supportive of like any other art. You don't ever hear him talking smack on people. Right?
No, he actually. Oh, my bad. He actually will just be quiet.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like he won't give his commentary at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And so part of the problem is what's he going to be like? Oh, this guy's freaking terrible. I'm the only one who can make an Indiana Jones movie. No, that's just not Spielberg's character. So unfortunately, we can't truly, hold in put a lot of esteem behind his praise because, that he's just a nice guy.
So the two questions I have for you then are, why? I mean, I think you answered it, but why do you think they made this movie? And I think your answer was Harrison Ford is like getting too old and we won't be able to do another one if we wait too long. So we should make one. Well,
Mm-hmm.
he'll still be in it. He'll still be Indy. And two, do you think, I mean, it would have been better if like Spielberg had just finished out all five?
Well, I think there was something unique about the original trilogy in the sense that the style was very, was uniform. The visual style was done all practical effects, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was Spielberg's directorial style and George Lucas's writing style, which the fourth one, and now I really want to go back and rewatch it because I wonder if after seeing the Dial of Destiny, if the Crystal Skull is as bad as we remember it now,
I don't
because
remember it
maybe
fondly. Yeah.
looking at it again, maybe you're like, well, we could have gotten worse, and now we know what worse looks like. But I think that there is something to be said about the Lucas Spielberg connection. I mean, these are two of the greatest storytellers of all time working on this particular project.
And there is something to be said, I think, for that visual style you're talking about. You know, a great example again is something like The Godfather. I think Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 are adhering to the same film language, the same style. And then you go to Godfather 3 and it just feels different. It looks a little different. The way they film it is a little different. It doesn't, it feels like that's why everyone always puts the third one like over here. Like it's not inherently like a bad movie, but it doesn't feel like a continuation of the first two.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's the film language. When we watch the original Indiana Jones trilogy, there is a visual style that's cohesive, and I think part of what makes the Crystal Skull so sort of offensive to us is that it's this very digital CGI heavy movie, and we're like, that's not what Indiana Jones was. Indiana Jones is people hanging from the bottom of trucks,
Yeah.
getting pulled down dirt roads and jumping between train cars. That's Indiana Jones. I think we've seen a similar thing with the Star Wars trilogy, then the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy, right?
Yeah.
How when you start changing what fans are used to expecting out of the franchise, suddenly they're very wary and upset and disappointed because this isn't what they're used to.
Yeah, I think Star Wars is actually a great example because I think if you go through all three trilogies, so you have the established film language of the original trilogy, you go to the prequels, George Lucas is still using the same filmmaking language, but he added all this CGI and all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff on top that adds it makes it feel different. And then you go to the sequel trilogy, and they're not even actually speaking the film language anymore. Because if you actually watch Star Wars, I mean, George Lucas uses very kind of basic filmmaking techniques, establishing shots, right? But he doesn't have a ton of camera movement, and he saves that for dogfights in space and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, like he's using fairly basic cinematography. And then you go to like the sequel trilogy and they're using a lot of sweeping camera movements. They're, tracking, they're doing all these different things that, George Lucas didn't really do. And then it's funny because they want to go back to that kind of almost practical effects with, CGI on top of it, trying
Mm-hmm.
to speak that film language. And that didn't fully work either because it
Yeah.
feels a little out of place. You're not speaking right exactly what George Lucas did. And so I don't know, it's fascinating. But anyway, yeah, no, I mean, I think especially with Indy, one of the things that stands out to me is you mentioned right at the top of your review, there's a sequence on top of a train, but you said it has kind of like a CG feel to it.
Yep.
And it's weird because I think when you're doing practical effects and stunts, one of the things that happens is when things are fantastical. So say Jurassic Park, right?
Yep.
Dinosaurs.
Yep.
There's no dinosaurs today, whatever. We don't know exactly what they looked like when they, ruled the earth and all that. But our brains allow for this fantastical to enter the frame. And we're
Yeah.
wowed by it because it's something we can never see. But when you have a guy on a train or you have a guy hanging, off the back of a truck, we know what that should look like.
Yeah.
And if it's CG, the stakes just drop dramatically because we're like, that's just, I mean, it's not real.
Yeah. Right.
Like it doesn't work. And I think that's one of the reasons why something like, Top Gun Maverick did really well. There's a lot of aerial dogfights and there's a lot of plane sequences in various different movies, ranging from war to, just action films. And when you look at Top Gun Maverick, because they worked so hard on the cinematography to make it really feel like you're with them on this mission, it feels spectacular because you're like, holy crap, this is probably what it would be like.
Yeah.
And they succeeded. But yeah, if you have any of that CG element for what I would consider to be kind of, something that could happen to any of us realistically, if I had a whip and got pushed off a truck, but I'm hanging on by this whip, I think I know what that would look like. And then like you said, I mean, it's almost in a weird way a little bit of a bummer that they're doing, say, a train sequence or on top of a train sequence when it's like, they've already done that in Indy. And now you compare the two and you're like, they probably did it better back in the 80s.
Yeah, right. 1989 was better than 2023. Like,
yeah, so I don't know. It's interesting. But before we move on to our next topic, which we were kind of already leaning into, but we'll get to it. I wanted to ask you about the status of like Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy. Last week we talked a little bit about Pixar and the state of Pixar. Now we're looking at, a lot of the Star Wars movies they've done well at the box office, but they haven't been received that well by fans. And now you have Indy 5 coming out. It's underperforming at the box office and also isn't being, universally loved by the fans. So it's interesting because, Kathleen Kennedy, I think, who is a fantastic producer. She's had a ton of praise. She's worked on some great films and has praise from both Spielberg and Lucas. So I have no doubt that she's great at her job. I'm just wondering, when it comes to this IP, do they need like another creative person, like a buffer? Because it doesn't seem like you have like this 5-star IP, but they're not knocking it out of the park. Something kind of has to change, I think. I don't know if she has to be fired or anything, but I'm not calling for it. But I mean, I do think
there's a lot of
something's not working.
Speculation on the internet that she's going to be fired, and a lot of people are calling for her to be fired. I think the problem is this: Lucasfilm was originally helmed by George Lucas. George Lucas, whether you like him or not, is a visionary. He's been pushing the limits of cinema, the ways that we make stories, and the types of stories that we tell, right? Like, you can't, like, whatever your criticisms are for Lucas, you can't criticize him for being a game changer and a visionary. And the problem is, I don't think Kathleen Kennedy is a visionary. She's a successful producer. She made some great movies.
I know.
She made movies with Steven Spielberg. And her job is to say, Steven Spielberg, you have a vision. I'm going to do everything in my power to get you the people, the tools, the locations that you need to bring your vision to life. And she did it time and time again. But being a good producer is not necessarily the type of creative role that is needed for Lucasfilm. Obviously, she's putting together the budgets and they're building incredible teams to make these movies. The problem is from the visionary standpoint, where what's the story? Is there a cohesive vision? Do we have an idea of what we're trying to do with this indie movie? Or are we just making an indie movie to take advantage of existing IP? And I don't think that she can fulfill those roles of the visionary who understands what they're doing and creating a way to push Lucasfilm forward.
Yeah, I can see it. Like, I can see where Disney would be stepping in and saying, hey, Kathleen Kennedy, we purchased Lucasfilm and we need Star Wars movies. We need a new Star Wars land at our theme parks. We want people excited for Star Wars. Now get to work and make these movies. But when you look backwards and you look at George Lucas, right? If you actually look at what he was doing with like the original trilogy and then even the prequel trilogy, I mean, he's deconstructing the hero's journey. He's trying to see if he can create a modern myth and modern motifs. He's playing around in this sandbox and really seeing if he can kind of deconstruct how all of that works and then rebuild it in his own vision successfully. But it's like the guy's on a mission and he's really trying to do something here. And I think a lot of times we take that for granted. And
Yeah.
it's funny that I guess now this is coming up because you had actually sent me an article about George Lucas that I think was titled something along the lines of like, we owe George Lucas an apology or
Yeah.
something. I don't
Yeah.
know if you want to just summarize the article, but essentially
Well,
they're like, he got demonized and
yeah. And now, 10 years later, 20 years later, after some of these things that people hated, which the author specifically points to the prequel trilogy and,
yeah,
the
not well
Crystal
received in
Skull
its time.
Indiana Jones movie, he's like, as we're looking at it again, once upon a time we thought, George Lucas, how could you do this? You're the absolute worst. And then we're seeing what these things look like without George Lucas, and we're like, we could have gotten a lot worse. And in fact, we did.
Yeah. Wow. We had it pretty good and we didn't know it.
Yeah.
So, and it's crazy too, because like you said, he kind of alludes to the prequel trilogy. And now, I mean, I think the prequel trilogy is not that hated by Star Wars
I
fans.
think most Star Wars fans now consider Revenge of the Sith to be one of the best Star Wars films.
Yeah, like it's up there. And I think people's memories of it have now that may be a little bit of a nostalgia effect, which, what a powerful drug. But, you know, over time, I think people are starting to look back on those and realize the depth that was there and what he was really going for. Now, did Lucas knock the prequel trilogy out of the park? I think the same way he knocked the original trilogy out of the park. Probably not. There's some cheesy dialogue. There's some decisions that were made, and maybe we'll dive into that on a different episode, CP. But by and large, George Lucas was trying to do something. So I always got to applaud the man for like even the prequel trilogy. I'm like, he had a story he wanted to tell, and he did tell it. And in retrospect, I mean, it's not bad.
No,
So
I definitely agree.
I love the prequels.
I know you do.
I have two questions.
Yep.
One, I gotta ask: is the Dial of Destiny at least cool?
No.
Oh, so that I mean, okay.
It's like on Crystal Skull level, which is, part of what I think is cool about the original trilogy is we're going for these actual kind of objects from lore. And it's cool seeing Indiana Jones be the guy to get them. Now we're kind of going with these other weird, like pseudo alien technology things that are, just feels like a bit of a stretch.
Okay. I mean, I was hoping maybe at least that was cool. I mean, it's in the title, so hopefully whatever it is pretty badass. But oh well. And then second, if our listeners had to make the decision, should they go to the theater to see Indiana Jones? So kind of a two-parter, but do you think this is worthy of a theater experience? And would you recommend that people check this out?
I would not recommend you check it out, and I would not recommend you waste the money seeing it in the theater.
Dang, that's not good. I mean, if you got that AMC A plus or wait, what is it? A-list stubs or something?
A-list, yeah.
Maybe if you can go check it out. I might go, CP.
Well,
honestly, I think I might get A-list. I have two AMCs near me. I can go in either direction.
Well, you should do that. We should do an episode about all the movies D-Man's going to go see once he gets his AMC membership.
I'll go see everything. Yeah, I'll completely catch up. Well, I want to throw it over to you for our final topic, CP, because it's something that I think we kind of dove into with Indiana Jones, and here they're doing it right. Yeah, now they're doing it right. So you take it away.
Obviously, we got another major blockbuster movie coming out. The day that this podcast drops, the movie will have premiered the night before, and that is in fact a new Mission Impossible movie. Now, what Mission Impossible movies do really, really well is they seem to embrace their stunts, especially the big stunts. And this one, obviously, they have been hyping us up for 6 months about what this one is going to be. And I'm really psyched to see it actually unfolding on the big screen.
Well, the thing about Mission Impossible that's crazy is Tom Cruise is often doing these major stunts himself, which in and of itself is pretty crazy because I don't know what the insurance is on that, but most A-list, most A-list movie stars don't do their own stunts for really out of an abundance of caution, both physical and for the future of the star. So, it says a lot about Tom Cruise that he's willing to actually take these stunts on, and then it also says a lot about like stunt artists.
Yep.
Because if you look at some of these, hanging on to the outside of a building, or literally you're hanging on to the side of a plane while it's taking off, like that's pretty wild. And in this one, it looks like they're gonna Tom Cruise, I guess, is driving a motorcycle literally off a cliff, which we've seen similar things happen, but obviously they not only had stunt doubles, but more than likely there's some CG involved, and that's not how it really worked. Something that comes to mind is like GoldenEye, the
Yeah.
beginning, they like go off, but you're like, that didn't really happen.
Well, I think the other thing too is Tom Cruise doesn't just do the big stunts in the movie, he does the small stunts in the movie, right? There's a reason why every single motorcycle chase movie in a Mission Impossible movie has Tom Cruise without a helmet, because he wants us to know that he's actually the guy on the motorcycle.
Interesting.
There's a great, behind the scenes clip of, I believe it is in the fifth Mission Impossible, when Tom Cruise is doing the stunt of jumping between two buildings and actually busts his ankle. His ankle shatters.
I remember that. Yeah.
His ankle hits the wall and shatters, and he gets up and keeps running anyway, because that's just the kind of guy that he is. And so the point is, obviously, part of, I think, the adrenaline of these movies is the fact that we are there with the star, with Ethan Hunt, through all of these escapades right up close, because we don't have to worry about falling back as there a stuntman who's stepping in for a particular scene.
Well, and one of the things that's really fascinating about the Mission Impossible franchise is I do feel like they're leaning into, with their marketing leading up to each film, they are leaning into these stunts, and they're using them a little bit as spectacle to pique people's interests in maybe going to see, because I think there is something to be said about the fact that, like, if you're in the audience, and this is, I love this stunt when he's hanging on the side of the building. I remember my palms sweat, because you're like, wow, that's great. We know, right, in the audience, because they've done such a good job to the lead up to the film, that this really happened. Yeah. That this isn't Tom Cruise on a set somewhere and then they just CGI filled in the rest of the frame.
Yep.
You're like, he did this, and it's terrifying me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that matters. I think when it comes to stunts, there, like I said, especially when it's a practical thing like that, it really ratchets up the tension when we in the audience either truly believe that this is actually happening, or you're like, somebody did this. I mean, obviously with safety precautions and stuff, but like, someone did it. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So I got to ask you, of what I would consider the big four Mission Impossible stunts, which we're going to start with in the fourth one, climbing the Burj Khalifa.
Oh, yeah.
Right? In the fifth one, hanging out the side of the airplane. In the sixth one, the skydive sequence. And now in the seventh one, the motorcycle parachute jump that we have not seen yet, but we've seen it in the trailers and the the video about the making of it. What do you think is the most impressive?
The one, so, okay, it's actually the first two that you listed. Watching Tom Cruise hang on to the side of a plane while it's taking off, like, just imagining, let's say the movie studio was like, listen, you're strapped in and you're not going to fly off this airplane. Like, it's going to be fine. All you got to do is just hang on and, act your heart out.
Yeah.
But if they told me that, they're like, we'll strap you on this plane, you will not fall off. Even if you do, you got a parachute, like, you're safe, I still would not do it. That's crazy.
I do think it's funny. I remember him talking about that when he's like, yeah, I didn't sleep the night before that.
Yeah, that's like a crazy stunt. So, I mean, I think that might have to be number one, but I do remember being blown away by the stunt when he climbs the building. And just realizing, like, how high it is. And like I said, I remember it literally, like, made my palms sweat in the theater. And I was like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, it's a movie. I've seen people do all kinds of things and my palms don't sweat. But I was like, I know Tom Cruise, they went out there and did this. Like, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So, but all the stunts have looked amazing. Even the skydiving. I mean, I can say personally, I've been skydiving. So, like, I've been there. But
well, the skydiving one blows me away, because in the special features about it, first of all, they had to do that jump about 200 times to get it right. And what I find the most insane is the cinematographer is skydiving backwards, right? He jumps out of the plane backwards.
That's
And
amazing.
him and
That is
Tom
amazing.
Cruise had to time themselves. So he's like, okay, it's going to be 3 steps and I fall back and then you run after me. And then it was something like while the cinematographer was falling, Tom Cruise was supposed to get like a little bit of distance. And then in 3 seconds, he was supposed to go from like
Like,
25 feet away to soar up to and stop just 3 feet short of him, and this is, 5,000 feet above the earth. And I'm like, the amount of precision that it took to perfect these things just blows my mind. Like these Mission Impossible movies, when I look at the budget on them, I'm like, I totally get it. You know, what you guys
yeah.
had to do to deliver, a minute and a half worth of action, it took you 6 months and it paid
And can
off.
I,
It's incredible.
yeah, I was going to say, can I just say that, like, I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I find it, I'm not going to lie. I don't know how much it costs, how much extra it costs versus just doing a CG version. Like, you look at like the Fast and the Furious films, or even what was the one with Tom Holland, where he was like the adventure
Oh,
based on a
Uncharted.
video game. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's like falling out of a plane, but you're like, I mean, they didn't do that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like they didn't do it. So I don't know. That just blows my mind. And I don't know. I want to say on this show, like Tom Cruise, I appreciate you, man. Like that's pretty cool. Like the lengths you'll go to entertain. But I'm like, it is like inherently more entertaining.
Yeah.
It
Right.
just is. Like to know that they did it, you're like, it makes the whole thing feel like a much bigger spectacle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I agree.
I just wanted to say I was just kidding. Everything that happened in Fast and the Furious, they really did that. So
Oh.
yeah, Vin Diesel, you're the man.
But yeah, and based off of early audience reviews, apparently, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is supposed to be incredible. I
I
think
know. I
probably
want
the
to go.
worst part about it is that it sounds like the only Mission Impossible movie we're getting about after this is Dead Reckoning Part 2. And
We'll
then
have to
my
see how it
understanding is
ends.
Tom Cruise is like, I'm done, which I can't really think he will be because he's been doing these movies for like 30 years now. But if he is, that
It
would
is.
be such a shame.
It does remind me of like Fast and the Furious in that regard, where like if you go back to the original one, it's so different in tone and style than
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
new ones. Where yeah, like I mean, you look at Fast and the Furious, it's like about drag or street racing and
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
LA culture and all this stuff. And the new ones, they're like globe trotting,
And they're in
action
space.
heroes. Yeah. Like they're everywhere. Yeah. You're like, this is crazy. And yeah, it kind of has that feel where it's like this franchise. I think it was right around the fourth movie. Is that correct? Where it kind of like took on a different direction.
The fourth, or I think the fifth one is really where it's like, because that's when they go to Brazil.
Yeah, one of them in there. Yeah, they like totally change. Like he gets this new team around him and like all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and then they like now it's in its current form. But CP, I didn't hear you answer. Of those four, which one is your favorite?
Ooh. Um, as I said, I think I have the most appreciation for the skydiving one after learning everything that was involved in getting it. But I still think the creme de la creme of all movie stunts is hanging outside of an airplane because,
That's yeah, it's pretty
I
gnarly.
mean, like, I'm with you. I would not do that for any amount of money.
Yeah, I'm like I don't know if I'd skydive 200 times, but I have done it once.
Yeah.
So like I don't know. I guess I would, but I wouldn't hang out of that building either, though. Who
Yeah. Right.
knows? But yeah, I think the plane one is probably my favorite. That or the building. Those two are just incredible. But yeah, I mean it's a lot of fun, and it's actually one of those things that's a little bit of a letdown when in the same episode we're talking about Indiana Jones and Mission Impossible, and I feel like Indiana Jones, obviously not with 80-year-old Indy, but if you're going to do an indie film, it stunts should be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
They should
No,
be
I
doing
agree.
some cool set pieces, some really cool stuff
Yeah.
that it's like they're going a different way now. They're not embracing that as much anymore.
Yeah. It's just a shame.
So, but that's okay because we got Mission Impossible.
Yeah. So, audience, if you're gonna, let us know if you're planning to check out Mission Impossible, or actually by the time this episode's dropped, if you have seen Mission Impossible, because obviously I'll post my review, and I'm sure D-Man will share his thoughts too.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I get that A list for AMC, I might go see all these movies. Just take a day at the movies. I don't know. go watch 3 of them, and then I'll do that on a Saturday and then come back on Sunday when the week reboots.
You should do that.
Go see like 6 movies in a weekend. That'd be awesome. Well, listeners, everybody tuning in, thank you so much for checking out the podcast. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoyed the show. You can follow everything for the podcast at filmmakerscompass.com. And we are now on Threads, as I mentioned at the top of the show.
Woo-hoo.
So no posts yet, but we'll be on there soon and hopefully engaging with all of you. So look forward to that. You can find on filmmakerscompass.com a feed of all the previous episodes, as well as all of our social media links, which are at Film Comp Podcast or Film Comp Pod. So you can follow me at Big Kid D-Man and CP.
You can follow me at NDCal5. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. We will see you back here next week. Until then, keep watching movies.